So Webley Bowles is an Associate Director of Codes and Policy at New Buildings Institute, NBI, with 20 years of experience in architecture, sustainable building design, advocacy, and code development. Webley heads NBI's carbon life cycle research and develops policy strategies to support a carbon neutral future. Her current work includes developing embodied carbon in codes and utility programs. Welcome, Webley.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm so thankful that Megan was able to do that overview of that federal funding. While it might not seem like it's impacting us, it's really allowing this carbon neutral future to come to fruition as there's all this funding that's out there. So all of this is going to be setting the stage for more and more products, low carbon products on the market. And where I've been focusing has been embodied carbon in the building codes. And so I'm going to share a little bit about some of that work, and specifically in California and in Seattle. But I do want to state that just talk a little bit about where there are embodied carbon requirements in building codes. So ASHRAE 189.1, also known as the International Green Construction Code, includes an option and now includes requirements for tracking EPDs. Marin County, while it's not a building code, it's a municipal code associated with the building, does set requirements for GWP requirements for concrete. Denver Green Code has requirements for GWPs for concrete and steel. And then Cal Green has 3 different paths, which we'll talk about more today. So I also want to know that there are 3 different pending standards, which is going to make it easier to incorporate embodied carbon requirements into the code in the future. ACI 323 is being developed for a low carbon concrete code. ASHRAE 240 and ResNet 1550 are methodologies for calculating whole life carbon. They do not set limits, but it sets that methodology, and it's going to be a lot easier to reference these standards within the code and then have a list of limits within the code itself. But first, let's start talking about Cal Green. So if you know anything about Cal Green, lately you've probably heard that there are new embodied carbon measures going into effect July 1st of this year. We've been working on this for quite a while, a number of years. There's been a lot of stakeholder engagement around it. The final building code language has been published, I believe. You can find it on the California Building Standards Commission website. And one big question that we get around this code is, well, we'll get into many questions around the different paths, but one big question is why is it set at 100,000 square feet? And then 50,000 square feet for schools. And I just want to address that up front so I don't forget about it later on. The building size was kind of based on where we can make a lot of change. So they're the smallest buildings, account for about half of commercial buildings in California, but it's actually only about 9% of the total commercial square footage. And looking at buildings that are 50,000 square feet account for about 66% of commercial, but 50% of the commercial floor space. So looking at that 100,000, it's about 2% of projects. So pretty small number of projects that go through the pipeline, but it's about 40% of the square footage. So focusing on this as a requirement in the code allows us to focus on those larger buildings, which are probably going to have a larger architecture and design team that can kind of support this and get some lessons learned out of it. But one of the important things about this Cal Green code, embodied carbon options, is that it's really moving 2 voluntary measures into the mandatory, and then it's adding another that's kind of already happening in California. So these are the 3 options. You get to choose one of 3, and really it's kind of like either you're doing building reuse or you're choosing life cycle analysis or the prescriptive path. So the building LCA is asking, the life cycle analysis is asking that you're showing a 10% reduction from a user-defined baseline. And that's pretty similar to what was already in the code as a voluntary option. The prescriptive path is really aligned with Buy Clean California materials, but it also includes concrete. And then the reuse path was what was already in there. So again, moving something from voluntary to mandatory, or mandatory option, I should say. And these measures are also being adopted by jurisdictions. In California, similar to Washington, jurisdictions can adopt code at a higher level. So we're already hearing interest in jurisdictions that want to adopt these higher tiers. So we're going to see more of that, I think, as the year goes on. So starting to look at the life cycle analysis option first. It's similar to an energy model. I think everyone on this call likely knows what an LCA is, but similar to an energy model, it's related to the manufacturing building products. And we anticipate that this is going to be the most popular option. And similar to an energy model, it's more of a design-based credit. It doesn't actually have to show that what was installed matches what was designed. But I'm going to show you why we should care about that. So for the documentation, we need a summary of the GWP analysis that's produced by the software. We need these CalGreen worksheets, and that's also signed by the professional of record. And that signature of the design professional of record is kind of a key component here, because we know that architects are kind of the glue in all of these projects. And so these measures are really kind of relying on the design professional to make sure that everything is installed, is designed and constructed as intended. The other component here is that you have to include an operations and maintenance manual that includes this information and provide that to the owner at the close of construction. So those are just like some of the details within the requirements. Is that one? Did I skip a slide? Okay. So to set it up right, we want to make sure that all of the requirements are in the design, in the construction documents. And while CalGreen doesn't actually require that all of these things are included, this is what's going to set you up for success. So for specifications, we want to include the requirements in Division 1, include the EPDs for those key products that you have identified within your building LCA, and incorporate the LCA worksheet within the drawings. Within the RFP, you want to make sure that embodied carbon reporting requirements are highlighted. Within submittal reviews, well, I guess in bid meetings, we also want to make sure that we're stressing the importance of this. And then in bid meetings, making sure that that is also stressed. And construction administration is going to be important for this as well, to make sure that the contractor understands, what's in the specifications and how to implement it. And then at closeout, we want to make sure that we are providing those construction administration, operations and maintenance information to the owner at the construction as well. So for building reuse, there's certain components for reuse. It's existing primary structural elements, enclosure, roof and wall framing, insulation, and exterior finishes. There are a number of items that are or can be excluded: windows, insulations, and anything that's structurally unsound can be excluded from that. The calculation is, the other option around building reuse is that you can have an addition, but it can't be more than 2 times the area of what's being reused. So this is kind of the main thing that might make people not use this building reuse as an option. So the calculation for this is pretty similar to LEED. It is looking at the area that is being reused, and there is a worksheet associated with it. And similar to the building LCA, it is a design related measure. So we basically want to follow the same process to make sure that we're including in the specifications, the construction documents, the bid documents, and during construction, we want to make sure that we're keeping all of those materials, nothing extra is being removed unless changes happen. We might find later on that there are issues, something is not as structurally sound as we initially thought. Getting into the third one, the prescriptive path. This is aligned with BioClean California, except it also includes concrete. So this requires that specific products are or lower than specific GWP limits that you see here on the screen. These limits are set really high. They're above industry average. So what Megan was presenting around GSA, these are way above that. The intent is that this is being introduced for the first time, and it should be easy to comply with these. And we anticipate that over time, these values will be coming down. So to comply with the requirements, the project teams will collect and report on type 3 environmental product declarations, either product specific or factory specific, both are allowed. And it's not a design credit like the other two, but there are design actions that need to take place to make sure that we're successful in the construction phase. Since concrete is a unique product, each mix doesn't have to meet the specific GWP limit for each individual strength class, but the contractor can apply like a weighted average approach where on average, all the mixes meet that GWP average limit. And this is a similar process which was used in Marin County for their low carbon municipal code. And there is a worksheet for this that the design professional will need to sign. And since it is construction related measures, the architect will need to work closely with the construction team to confirm compliance throughout the process. So again, very similar process, make sure it's included. Requirements are in Division 1, the individual specification sections, other components of the CDs, including the worksheet, the bid documents, submittal reviews to make sure that the right products are being installed, close out providing those EPDs to the owners so that they have them, and then that enforcing entity also has access to those EPDs. And there is some small print at the screen, at the bottom of the screen, which is really hard for me to read too. And it says that the enforcing agency may require inspection and inspection reports in accordance with sections 702.2 and 703.1 during and at the completion of construction to demonstrate substantial conformance. Inspections shall be performed by the design professional of record or third party acceptable to the enforcing agency. So this is like this second layer of enforcement to make sure that that there can be a third party review if needed. So I want to talk about compliance and enforcement a little bit. Since this is new to the code officials, there's some trepidation around this. It's a lot of new information for them to learn. On that last slide, it said that the enforcing agency may require reports, and reporting is required to be provided in the language so that it can be provided separately. And for compliance with the measures, it's really need to start early. So that's why I keep stressing like these need to be done during the design process to make sure that it's implemented properly in case there is that secondary layer of review that's not just the design professional signing off on them, but there is that documentation throughout that process. So the code officials are going to be looking at those worksheets for completeness, and that might be where their knowledge ends. And that might be all that they do. But there is that second layer that I want to make sure people are familiar with. They can request that additional information at any point during the construction process. And the onus is really on that design team. So that signature states that what was reported is accurate to the best of your ability. And that's where we're kind of hanging our hat, is to make sure that the design professionals are really responsible for this. But knowing that this is going to be examined in the field means that architects that are doing CA need to kind of keep an eye on a lot of these things to make sure that the design is matching the installation. So similar to anything else, this is probably all pretty obvious to most people, but it is new to many code officials. So I want to make sure that we know what they might be looking for. So collecting that relevant information, taking a bunch of photos, retaining that documentation, it's all typical part of CA, which I think is going to be a helpful thing since we are looking at projects that are over 100,000 square feet. We're going to have design teams that are likely doing CA. So when we say that we need to start early and kind of hit things are hard, we need to communicate across all those different roles, invite the concrete vendors, early to those design discussions, even before bid, need to coordinate with the structural engineer. The answer doesn't always have to be like, yes, we have the best mix, we can do it, but we really want to make sure that whoever we're working with is open to collaboration, because that's going to be what is going to get you the best concrete mix, finding the best lowest carbon steel that meets the requirements. And then construction administration, just it's easier to monitor when you're on site. And then front loading to the documentation is available early onward. Specifications, calculations, those worksheets are signed and completed, etc. That's going to be the more value that you can get out of the field inspection. All right, so that is CalGreen. I'm sure there's some questions there. We'll get into that during Q&A. I do want to mention Seattle. So let's jump into that. This was a really quick turnaround, but because MBI has been working and submitting embodied carbon code language to the state, so Washington in 2022, there was an assumption that the socialization of that proposal would be able to help Seattle kind of move that proposal along a little quickly. Maybe not as quickly as it actually was. So last January, and some of you on this call were probably involved in this, someone from the city reached out to us and a couple of design professionals and asked us if we would submit a proposal to the Seattle Building Code for embodied carbon in 4 weeks. We really, really quickly got together meetings with contractors, concrete and steel professionals to consider 2 different proposals for the Seattle Building Code. In the end, I think it ended up being like a 3-week sprint to get something together. It was a very quick proposal that we put together. Not everyone was happy with the submission, but that's kind of how compromise works. So we created this proposal. We had these discussions. The city was supposed to review it in April and discuss the proposals publicly to see if we could get it into the next code. It kind of died on the vine with minimal communication. Just got word recently that there wasn't enough support from the city to kind of move this forward and to hold these working groups. So even though it came together quickly, there were a lot of design and construction professionals that kind of rallied, signed a letter of support for this, and provided examples. And if you're, feel free to in the chat to say that you helped with this, because I really appreciate everyone kind of coming together quickly to be able to do that. So while this proposal kind of died in pre-committee just before it got to committees, I wanted to share it just so we can see kind of what it looked like. We basically submitted 2 prescriptive proposals, one for concrete, another for steel. And the requirement was that for projects that were 50,000 square feet and larger, and it would only apply to ready mix concrete, steel shapes, and rebar. So 100% of the concrete needed to meet the weighted average GWP as seen in the table. So as I talked about, that weighted average component, you can kind of see that calculation here. It's very similar to Marin County and to what was ultimately in CalGreen. And that's kind of the preferred approach because it allows that flexibility. And then the steel proposal. These are the steel limits. They're pretty easy to achieve using US-based steel. Nucor Seattle was not in opposition of this because their steel was within range, and we did bring them into that discussion. So since the proposal died for this current or upcoming code, we're hoping that there is interest in this code and that we'll either be able to pass it at the state level at this next go around, or we can continue working with Seattle and have a little bit more time, have some working groups kind of define, basically using lessons learned from California. And then also, I know that a lot more design firms in Seattle are using low carbon concrete mixes and are learning a lot through that process. So we're hoping that that will be able to move us forward. So I'm going to stop there. We do have some resources on our website. I will put that in the chat. Y'all can take a look at them, but there's my contact if you have any other questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Webley. So big changes in California, which I know many people on this call, even though we're Seattle based, do some projects in California. So it's really great to sort of hear about that. And hopefully we'll get some motion going on in Seattle or Washington over here over the next year or so.